There is a word many older adults hear long before it is ever spoken out loud. They sense it in conversations that pause too long, in concerned looks that linger, in suggestions that begin with good intentions. That word is nursing home. Most people assume the fear comes from aging itself, from weakness, from illness, from time running out. But for many older adults, that is not the real fear. They have already made peace with getting older. They understand the body changes. They accept that energy fades and recovery slows. What they quietly fear is something else entirely. They fear losing control over the smallest parts of daily life, not deciding when to wake up, not choosing what feels right to eat, not being trusted to know their own limits. They fear losing identity. After decades of being someone, a parent, a worker, a problem solver, a steady presence, the idea of becoming only a resident feels unsettling. As if a whole life could be reduced to a label and a schedule. And perhaps most painful of all, they fear being seen only as someone to be managed, not listened to, not known, but handled. This fear rarely announces itself clearly. Older adults don't always say, "I'm afraid of disappearing." Instead, they say things like, "I don't want to be a burden," or "I'm fine for now." These words sound practical, but beneath them is a quiet resistance, a wish to remain the author of their own days. For many, the word nursing home carries the feeling of a final transition, not the end of life, but the end of choice. A sense that once that door closes, life becomes something that happens to them rather than something they still participate in shaping. This is why conversations around care can feel so heavy. They touch something deeply personal. Older adults are not rejecting help. They are protecting meaning. They want to know that even if their body needs support, their voice still matters, that their preferences are not inconveniences, that their presence is not reduced to a list of needs. Before choosing a nursing home, many older adults wish someone had asked a different question. Not, "Is this the safest option?" but "What are you most afraid of losing?" Because when that fear is understood, decisions begin to slow down. They become gentler, and space opens for paths that feel less like an ending and more like a continuation. Some people listen to this quietly. Others may feel something familiar stirring inside. Both are welcome here. There comes a moment that many older adults remember clearly even if they never speak about it, not because it is dramatic, but because it is honest. Daily life begins to feel heavier. Not suddenly, not loudly, just quietly harder. The morning takes longer to begin. Shoes feel more difficult to put on. The distance to the mailbox seems a little farther than it used to be. Nothing feels broken. But something feels different. For a long time, people adapt without telling anyone. They change their routines, they move more carefully, they rest more often between small tasks. From the outside, everything still looks the same. Independence appears intact. But inside, there is a growing awareness that living alone now requires more effort than before. This awareness can feel painful, not because help is unwanted, but because it arrives with a quiet question. If I need support now, who am I becoming? Many older adults have spent their lives being self-reliant. They were the ones others depended on. They solved problems without asking. They carried responsibility without complaint. So when independence begins to shift, it can feel like a loss of identity, not just ability. Dependence at this stage does not feel gentle. It feels like a crack in a long-held self-image. This is why many people delay asking for help even when they are tired. They are not denying reality. They are protecting dignity. They want to remain the one who decides when help enters their life and how much of it stays. Living alone at this point becomes a careful balance. One misstep feels more serious. One bad night lingers longer. And yet fully giving up independence feels unbearable. So people stand in between safety and selfhood, between being supported and being seen. This in-between space is rarely acknowledged, but it is where many important decisions are quietly shaped. What most older adults wish for in this moment is not to return to the past, and not to be rushed into a future that feels unfamiliar. They wish for a way to be supported without being diminished, to accept help without feeling replaced, to move forward without feeling erased. This moment matters more than people realize, because how dependence is introduced now will shape how the rest of life is experienced. For many older adults, it is not the nursing home itself that feels heavy. It is not the rooms, not the hallways, not even the care. It is the feeling of being quietly moved out of their own story. Most people do not experience this as a sudden event. It begins much earlier, often in conversations that sound practical. "We just want you to be safe. This will be easier for everyone. You won't have to worry anymore." These words are not cruel. They are usually spoken with care, but what they imply can feel deeply unsettling, because underneath them is a message many older adults hear clearly, even if no one says it directly. You are no longer the one deciding. Life, which once unfolded through personal choices, begins to feel prearranged. Wake-up times, meal times, activity times, days that used to feel open now feel scheduled. For people who have lived decades shaping their own routines, this can feel like being gently removed from the center of life and placed on the side, where things happen around them instead of with them. This is why nursing homes often feel like an ending, not an ending of care, but an ending of authorship. Many older adults say the same thing in different ways. "I felt like a guest in my own days. I was being taken care of but not truly known. I stopped feeling needed." And that loss is quiet but profound. It is not about rejecting help. It is about wanting help that does not erase identity. People do not want to feel like a chapter that has already been closed. They want to feel like the story is still being written, even if the pace has slowed. This is something families often don't realize at first. They see safety, comfort, structure. But older adults feel something else. They feel distance from the life they recognize as their own. And when that feeling is ignored, it can turn even the safest place into a lonely one. Some people listening to this may recognize that feeling immediately. Others may be sensing it for the first time. If this part touched something familiar in you, you may quietly leave the number 1 below. Only if it feels right. When the conversation slows down enough, another truth begins to surface. What many older adults are reaching for at this stage is not more care. It is continuity. Continuity is not a big idea. It lives in small, ordinary things. The same chair by the window. The same familiar street sounds in the morning. The same face that knows when silence is better than questions. These details may seem unimportant from the outside, but they quietly anchor a person to their own life. Care focuses on protection. Continuity protects identity. A person can be physically safe and still feel lost. Safe yet disconnected from the life they recognize as theirs. This is why so many older adults struggle after sudden changes. Not because the new place is wrong, but because the thread connecting past and present has been cut too abruptly. Continuity allows life to unfold instead of restart. It means days still make sense. Time still has texture. Choices, even small ones, still belong to the person living them. Choosing when to wake up. Deciding what feels comforting to eat. Keeping a habit that has no explanation except familiarity. These are not trivial comforts. They are quiet confirmations of selfhood. When continuity is preserved, people adapt more gently to change. They do not feel uprooted. They feel accompanied. This is why perfect safety alone is never enough. A life can be protected and still feel empty. What older adults often want is not to be guarded, but to remain recognizable to themselves. To feel that their life has not been paused or replaced, only adjusted. When familiar rhythms are honored, fear softens. Resistance eases. The body relaxes in ways that care alone cannot achieve. And this understanding changes how choices are approached. Instead of asking, "Where should this person go?" the question becomes, "How can their life continue with as little disruption as possible?" This shift opens space, because once continuity becomes the priority, it becomes clear that life does not have to move from full independence straight into full institutional care. There is often something in between, a quieter transition, a gentler arrangement, a way forward that allows support to arrive without breaking the rhythm of a life already in progress. And that is where many people begin to notice something they had not considered before. When continuity becomes the center of the conversation, the future begins to look different. It no longer feels like a narrow road with only 2 exits. For a long time, many older adults are gently pushed into believing there are only 2 possible directions. Either they continue living alone, holding everything together by themselves, or they move into a place where life is structured, organized, and overseen. This framing sounds practical, even caring, but it quietly removes something important: choice. Life does not usually move in such clean lines, especially later in life when change arrives gradually, not all at once. Between living completely alone and living within an institution, there exists a wide, often unseen space, a space where support can enter without taking control, where help can exist without replacing the life that came before it. Many older adults sense this long before they can explain it. They feel that the decision being offered is too sudden, too complete. It is not fear of help that makes them hesitate. It is the feeling that accepting one form of help requires giving up too much of themselves. This middle path is not about denying reality or holding on to the past. It is about allowing change to arrive in human-sized steps. Here life is adjusted rather than rewritten. Support shows up where it is needed most. Other parts of life are left undisturbed. Days still feel familiar. Faces remain known. Rhythms are allowed to continue. People in this space often describe a quiet sense of relief. They are no longer carrying everything alone, but they are also not being carried away from their own life. They still participate in decisions. They still recognize themselves in the mirror of daily routine. They still feel connected to the world they have built over decades. What defines this middle path is not a particular living arrangement. It is a feeling of remaining involved. Life continues to feel lived, not managed, supported, not supervised. Changes happen gradually, giving both the body and the mind time to adjust. Fear softens, resistance fades, and when fear is no longer driving every decision, something else becomes possible. Trust. Trust in the process. Trust in those offering help, and trust that dignity does not have to be sacrificed in order to be supported. As this trust grows, a new question begins to emerge quietly. If life is now shared more closely, if help is more present than before, how can dignity remain intact? That question does not bring anxiety. It brings awareness, and it gently leads into the next reflection. When the idea of shared living first appears, many older adults feel a quiet resistance, not because they dislike people, but because they fear losing themselves. Sharing space is often imagined as a life without boundaries. Too many voices, too little privacy, a constant sense of being watched or corrected. But dignity is not lost simply because life is shared. Dignity fades when choice disappears. Most older adults have shared space before. They lived with partners. They raised children. They welcomed relatives into their homes. What made those years livable was not control. It was respect. Shared living becomes painful only when a person is treated as someone who must be managed rather than understood. Older adults rarely resist help itself. They resist being rushed. They resist having decisions made without them. They resist feeling that their preferences have become inconveniences. Dignity lives in small permissions, being asked before changes are made, being given time to respond, being allowed to say no without explanation. Privacy does not disappear when people live together. It disappears when privacy is no longer valued. A quiet corner, a door that can be closed, an hour of silence that belongs to no one else. These are not luxuries, they are foundations. Autonomy at this stage of life does not mean doing everything alone. It means remaining involved in decisions that shape daily life, choosing when to rest, deciding how to spend the afternoon, keeping a habit simply because it feels right. When shared living is approached with intention, support feels different. It feels like presence, not surveillance, like companionship, not control. In such environments, older adults often relax rather than withdraw. They conserve energy for what matters. They speak more freely. They rest without fear of being judged. Shared living done well does not shrink a person's world. It stabilizes it. Not every shared space offers this, and not every situation is the same. But when dignity is protected, living with others does not take something away. It allows a person to remain fully themselves even as circumstances change. And when people are allowed to remain themselves, another quiet truth emerges. Being supported does not mean being useless. It simply means energy can be spent differently. When dignity is protected in shared living, another fear often rises quietly. It is rarely spoken aloud, but it shapes how many older adults see themselves. If I am being supported now, do I still matter? For a lifetime, usefulness has been measured by action. Working long hours, providing for others, solving problems before they are noticed. Many older adults grew up believing that value comes from effort, from productivity, from being the one others rely on. So when the body changes and support becomes necessary, something deeper is shaken. Not pride, identity. Support is often mistaken for replacement. As if once help arrives, a person quietly steps aside. But being supported does not mean becoming unnecessary. It means energy is no longer spent only on holding things together. In spaces where dignity remains intact, many older adults slowly rediscover a different kind of contribution, one that does not announce itself, one that does not need recognition. They contribute through presence, by being steady when others are rushed, by listening without interrupting, by noticing what others overlook. Wisdom at this stage does not arrive as advice. It arrives as perspective. A calm response where panic might have appeared. A pause where others might rush. A quiet understanding that not everything needs fixing. Emotional stability becomes a form of support that cannot be scheduled or assigned. It is felt. In shared environments that allow room for this, older adults often become anchors. They bring balance to conversations. They soften tension. They remind others that time can move more slowly. This contribution is rarely listed. It does not appear in plans or charts, but its absence is immediately felt. When older adults are seen only through the lens of their needs, this quiet contribution disappears. They withdraw. They speak less. They begin to feel invisible. But when they are seen as whole people with history, insight, and emotional depth, something changes. They re-engage. They observe. They offer presence in ways that feel natural, not forced. Being supported allows this shift to happen. Because when survival no longer consumes all energy, attention can turn outward again. This is why environments matter so deeply, not because of what they provide, but because of what they recognize. Places that acknowledge quiet contribution communicate a powerful message. You still belong. You still matter. You are still part of the exchange of life. When this message is felt, not spoken, people settle into themselves again. And from that place of steadiness, another question begins to form. If presence and wisdom still have value, then where can they be expressed freely? That question leads naturally to the next reflection, the importance of being in a place where one's voice still matters. When older adults begin to recognize that their presence still has value, another question quietly takes shape, not spoken directly, but felt in everyday moments. Does my voice still count? This question rarely appears in obvious ways. It shows up when decisions are made quickly, when conversations move on without waiting, when someone else answers before there is time to speak. At first, these moments feel small, easy to dismiss, but over time, they accumulate. When a person's voice is no longer invited, something inside begins to withdraw, not out of anger, out of fatigue. Having a voice does not mean controlling every decision. It means being included, being asked, being allowed time to consider even if the answer is uncertain. More than location, what truly matters is atmosphere. The tone of a place, the way people listen. In environments where voices still matter, conversations slow down. Questions are real, not polite. Silence is allowed without pressure. Older adults in these spaces often re-engage in subtle ways. They share preferences they thought no longer mattered. They express discomfort instead of enduring it quietly. They offer opinions without fear of being dismissed. A voice that is heard reinforces identity. It says, "You are still you." This is why the right place is not defined by size, design, or reputation. It is defined by whether a person feels spoken with, not spoken for. Respect lives in small gestures, waiting for an answer, remembering a preference, accepting a different opinion without resistance. When these gestures are present, older adults feel anchored. They remain emotionally present in their own lives. They continue participating in the rhythm of daily exchange. When they are absent, even the most comfortable setting can feel distant. Choosing a place where your voice still matters is not about asserting control. It is about preserving connection. Connection to self. Connection to others. Connection to the life that continues unfolding. And when that connection is protected, another distinction becomes clear. There is a difference between being supported and being supervised, between being accompanied and being managed. That difference leads gently into the next reflection, what it truly means to live a life that feels lived, not watched. When a person's voice is still heard, another distinction quietly becomes clear. The difference between being supported and being supervised. On the surface, these two can look very similar. Both involve care, both involve attention. Both are often motivated by concern, but they feel entirely different from the inside. A supervised life is carefully arranged. Schedules are clear, routines are fixed. Everything is designed to prevent mistakes. It looks safe. It looks efficient. Yet many older adults describe it with a quiet discomfort. I felt rushed. I felt monitored. I didn't know what my day was for anymore. A lived life feels different. It has pauses. It has uneven rhythms. It allows moments that serve no purpose except being felt. Waking up slowly without explanation. Lingering over a cup of tea. Sitting in silence without needing to justify it. These moments do not fit neatly into schedules, but they give shape to time. When life becomes supervised, these small freedoms begin to shrink. Not because anyone intends harm, but because efficiency quietly replaces meaning. Decisions are made quickly to keep things running smoothly. Days begin to feel interchangeable. Time becomes something to be filled rather than experienced. Older adults sense this immediately. They may not say, "I feel supervised." They say, "I feel tired," or "I don't feel like myself anymore." What they are missing is ownership. A lived life allows a person to remain the main character of their own days. Even if the story has slowed, even if the setting has changed, it means choosing when to rest, deciding when to engage, having the freedom to be quiet without concern. Support that respects this does not hover. It notices. It waits. It responds when needed, then steps back. In these conditions, older adults often regain a quiet confidence. They feel trusted again, and trust invites participation. They speak more freely. They engage more naturally. They remain emotionally present. Life does not need to be busy to feel meaningful. It needs to feel yours. When a person feels watched over, life narrows. When a person feels accompanied, life opens. This is the difference that shapes the final chapters of life. Not the amount of care, but the quality of presence. And as this understanding settles, one final reflection begins to emerge. If dignity, voice, and lived experience truly matter, then the later chapters of life are not about endings at all. They are about choosing how the story continues. That reflection leads gently into the closing thoughts. When people reach the later chapters of life, the questions they carry begin to change. They are no longer asking how to do more. They are asking how to live what remains with meaning. Throughout this journey, one quiet truth has repeated itself in many forms. Growing older is not about losing life. It is about changing the way life is held. When living alone is no longer possible, fear often appears first. Fear of losing control. Fear of losing identity. Fear of being managed instead of understood. But as we slow down and listen more closely, another picture emerges. People do not resist care. They resist disappearance. They want continuity instead of disruption. Dignity instead of efficiency. Presence instead of supervision. They want to remain the main character of their own days even as the pace softens. This is why the most important choices are not always about location. They are about atmosphere. About whether a life still feels familiar. About whether a voice is still heard. Between isolation and institution, there are gentler paths. Between independence and dependence, there are quieter forms of strength. Between doing and being done, for there is still contribution, steady, calm, and deeply human. When these truths are honored, life does not feel like it is closing in. It feels like it is settling into itself. The later chapters are not meant to be rushed. They are meant to be inhabited. If you are listening to this and quietly reflecting on your own life or on the life of someone you love, know that these questions are not signs of weakness. They are signs of care. This space exists for moments like these to pause, to reflect, and to remember that you still matter. If these reflections feel meaningful to you, you are welcome to stay with us by subscribing to the channel. Only if it feels right. We will continue sharing gentle thoughts like this for those walking through the later chapters of life with awareness and dignity. Until we meet again, take care slowly, kindly, and in your own way.